The year was 1878, and the high plains were dying of thirst. Autumn had come without relief, baking the red dust fine as flour. It coated everything in the camp of Cross Spur, getting into the water barrels, the grease traps, and the lungs of the men who were hammering the railroad west. The wind carried the metallic clang of steel on steel for miles, a sound that promised civilization but felt like a threat. Maggie Odell felt the grit in her teeth as she hoisted a sack of cornmeal onto the prep table. She was a woman built for hard work, not for fading. Her hair, the color of dark copper, was bound tight under a kerchief, but stray strands stuck to her damp forehead. She worked the massive wood stove in the cook tent, a canvas oven that breathed heat like a dragon. The air shimmered around her, thick with the smell of rendering salt pork and boiling coffee. She flexed her left hand, rubbing the smooth, puckered skin on her wrist. The scar was old, a pale white map of a grease fire that had taken her previous cook wagon and nearly her life. It was a constant reminder. In a place like this, a woman alone was only as good as her last meal served, and accidents were not forgiven. Maggie was a widow. Her husband, Seamus, had been a railroad man, same as the one she fed now. He had been vaporized by a boiler explosion 2 years back, leaving Maggie with nothing but his name and a familiarity with transient camps. She had learned to cook for large crews, learned to stretch provisions, and learned to patch men up when they were hurt. She knew herbs for fever and poultices for wounds. She knew how to keep quiet and how to look busy. But she was tired of just being hired. In the quiet moments, usually just before dawn when the fires were banked, Maggie Odell allowed herself a secret, aching goal. She did not want to be paid. She wanted to be needed. She wanted a place where her hands, her knowledge, meant more than just the $3 a week that kept her from starving. Cross Spur was not that place. Cross Spur was a boil on the landscape, populated by men who had run out of options. They were digging their way to California. Fueled by cheap whiskey and Deacon Crowell's promises of bonuses. Deacon Crowell was the foreman, a man who saw the world in ledgers and timetables. He walked the camp not with a gun, but with a clipboard. He looked at the vast, empty plains bordering the Comanche hunting grounds not as a home, but as an inefficiency. He wanted this buffer zone, as he called it, cleared. He envisioned a freight depot, a place where his name would be painted on a sign. And then there was Wade Thorne. Thorne was the muscle, a bounty hunter who found steady work keeping the camp secure. He was loud, drank heavily, and made his living off blood. He collected scalps, animal and human, and bragged that he could not tell the difference by the smell. He and his small crew were the friction that kept the camp raw. The tension simmered brightest when the Comanche trade group was near. They kept to the edge of the camp, by the dry creek bed. They were a quiet presence, led by a man named Tovitsi. Tovitsi was a contradiction. The stories in the tavern, mostly told by Wade Thorne, painted him as a savage, a ghost who had guided cavalry patrols into ambushes. Yet the army had also used him as a scout, trading his knowledge of the land for promises of peace that were seldom kept. Now, he led a small band of families, moving between the new railroad towns and the hidden camps. They traded dried meat, cured hides, and potent herbs that the white settlers were slowly learning to value. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulder, and moved with a silence that unnerved the noisy railroad crew. He was raising his niece, a small, quick-eyed girl named Naya. Her parents had been lost to the sickness that winter, leaving Tovitsi as her only protector. Maggie felt the camp's hatred like a physical weight. Deacon Crowell wanted the Comanche gone because they complicated his land surveys. Wade Thorne wanted them gone because their existence was an excuse for violence, and violence was his trade. Maggie's own position was precarious. She was good at her job, maybe too good. Her biscuits were light, her stew was thick, and she kept the pots cleaner than any cook they had hired before. But the scar on her wrist was a visible mark of disaster. The men, superstitious and bored, had started to whisper, "Bad luck, Maggie. They called her when they thought she could not hear. A wagon wheel split last week. A supply barrel had rolled into the ravine. This morning, her boss, Silas, a greasy man who owned the cook tent contract, had pulled her aside. His voice was a low growl. "Maggie, one of the meat mules is missing. The one carrying the cured bacon." She had stared at him. "I did not take it." "Silas." "I do not care if you took it," he hissed, his eyes avoiding hers. "I care that it is gone. Crowell is already docking my pay. He says this outfit is sloppy. If anything else goes wrong, anything, you're out. Wade Thorne already offered to have one of his boys handle the cooking. Says it is simpler." Maggie knew what that meant. Simpler meant hardtack and rancid pork. It meant filth. But it also meant she would be cast out, with winter approaching and nowhere to go. She pushed the anxiety down, kneading it into the dough. She would not give them the satisfaction. She worked with a fierce, clean energy, scrubbing the cutting board with lye soap until her knuckles were raw. Later that afternoon, needing a moment away from the oppressive heat, Maggie carried a bucket of vegetable scraps toward the creek bed. The railroad crew was at the far end of the line, their hammering distant. The camp was quiet. She stopped, near the creek bed. The Comanche group was preparing to move out. Naya was sitting on the ground, struggling with a length of braided horsehair, her small face tight with frustration. Tavitsi emerged from his lodge. He walked to the girl and knelt. Maggie expected him to be impatient, to grab the item or dismiss the child. Wade Thorne would have backhanded her for crying. But Tavitsi did not. He sat, cross-legged, and held out his hand. Naya slapped the tangled braid into his palm. Maggie watched, frozen. Tavitsi's hands were large and scarred, the hands of a warrior and a horseman. Yet he handled the delicate braid with an impossible gentleness. His fingers moved slowly, surely undoing the knot, showing the child the rhythm of the twist, over and under. He murmured something to her in his own language, and the girl's shoulders relaxed. She leaned against his knee, watching. In that single, quiet moment, every story Maggie had heard in the tavern evaporated. She saw no savage. She saw no ghost. She saw a man, patient and burdened, teaching a child. It was a kindness so profound, so stark against the backdrop of Cross Spur's brutality, that it made her chest ache. Tavitsi looked up. His eyes met hers across the dusty expanse. His gaze was steady, unreadable. He was not looking at her face, or her body, as the railroad men did. He was looking at her hands. He had been watching her. He had seen her earlier, when she thought no one was paying attention. He saw her scrub the cast iron with sand and hot water. He saw her dump the bucket of gray dishwater far from the fresh barrel. He saw her wash her own hands meticulously after she handled the raw salt pork, before she reached for the cornmeal. He saw the white scar on her wrist, a mark of fire. But he also saw the method. He saw the cleanliness. Tavitsi had a problem. His Doan, his trading group, was bound for the winter camps. They had to prepare for the great winter feast, a time of ritual and survival. The food for this feast had to be pure. It had to be prepared with clean hands, in clean pots, with a right mind. Their last cook, a woman who had learned the white men's shortcuts, had been careless. People had gotten sick. He needed a cook for the next 3 weeks, someone who understood that food was life, not just fuel. He needed someone safe. He looked at Maggie Odell. He saw the rumors that clung to her, the fear in the way the other white men looked at her. He saw the scar on her wrist, and he saw the way she respected the food. Tavitsi knew what Deacon Crowell and Wade Thorne wanted. He knew this dry autumn was a prelude to a hard winter, and a hard winter meant desperate men. Maggie stood there, the bucket handle cutting into her palm. She felt the weight of Tavitsi's gaze. It was not the hungry, assessing look of the crewman. It was not the cold calculation of Deacon Crowell. It was something else. It was the look of a man who saw exactly what she had to offer. She turned and walked back to the cook tent, the red dust swirling around her ankles. The sounds of the camp rushed back in the metallic ringing, the smell of whiskey and sweat. Silas was watching her from the tent flap, his arms crossed, his face sour. She was caught. Behind her lay the whispers of bad luck, the accusation of theft, and the certainty of dismissal. In front of her lay the brutal, greedy progress of the railroad, a force that crushed men like Seamus and saw the land only as profit. And out there, at the edge of the camp, a quiet warrior was helping his niece tie a knot, his eyes following the woman who knew how to keep her kitchen clean. Tovitsi needed her hands to cook. The stew that night was thin, but Maggie had managed to get flavor into it. She had used the last of her dried thyme and 3 precious onions. The men ate quickly, slopping the broth onto the dirt floor of the cook tent, their faces grim. The missing mule meant short rations, and short rations meant short tempers. A man named Finn, a young Irishman barely old enough to grow a beard, suddenly coughed. He dropped his tin plate. It clattered on the packed earth. "It is hot," he gasped, clutching his throat. The tent grew quiet. The only sound was the scrape of a spoon against a bowl. Finn stood up, his chair scraping backward. His face was pale, glistening with a sick sweat. He looked at Maggie, his eyes wide with panic and confusion. "Maggie, what?" He collapsed. He did not fall so much as fold, his body hitting the ground in a heap. He began to retch, a dry, agonizing sound. Wade Thorne was on his feet in an instant. He kicked Finn's dropped plate. "What in hell did you put in this widow?" Maggie rushed forward, kneeling beside Finn. She ignored Wade. The man's skin was cold, his breathing shallow. "Finn, can you hear me?" Wade grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like claws. He hauled her to her feet. "I asked you a question." He shoved his face close to hers. The smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him. "We have been hearing stories about you. Bad luck. Now this." He pointed a grimy finger at the convulsing man. "That looks like arsenic to me." A murmur went through the crowd. "Arsenic?" She tried to poison him. Silas, her boss, was white-faced, backing away toward the tent flap. "Maggie, I did not know." "Shut up, Silas," Wade snarled. He still held Maggie's arm. "You hired this witch. Deacon said you were running a sloppy camp. Now your cook is murdering the crew." "I did not," Maggie said, her voice shaking but clear. She tried to pull her arm free, but he tightened his grip. "He is sick. Let me help him." "Help him? You already helped him enough." Wade looked at the crowd, his eyes gleaming. He was enjoying this. "I say we stretch her neck. Let the buzzards decide if she is a witch." The men surged forward. They were not angry, they were scared, and Wade was giving their fear a name. "No!" Maggie shouted, finding her feet. She ripped her arm out of his grasp. She was a widow who had survived a fire. She would not be lynched over a bad stew. She shoved past Wade, back to Finn. The man was choking, his lips turning blue. This was not arsenic. She had seen arsenic poisoning once near Omaha. This was faster, more violent. This was bad food. She ran to the small wooden chest under her bunk. It held her few possessions, Seamus's spare shirt, her mother's prayer book, and her herbs. She had learned remedies from an old army nurse who had treated cholera. She grabbed a small linen pouch and a canteen. She ran back to Finn, shoving men out of her way. "Hold him down! Open his mouth!" 2 men, their faces dumb with shock, did as she commanded. Maggie poured a thick dark powder into her hand, mixed it with water from the canteen, and forced the slurry past Finn's teeth. "What is that?" someone yelled. "More poison." "It is mustard root and willow," Maggie snapped. "It will make him purge. Now, roll him on his side. Move." She pressed on the man's stomach. For a terrible second, nothing happened. Finn's body was rigid. Then he convulsed. A violent flood of stew and bile erupted from his mouth, splattering the dirt. The men jumped back, cursing in disgust. Maggie did not flinch. She kept her hand on his back as he emptied his stomach. The smell was horrific, acidic and rotten. When he was finished, Finn lay panting. The blue tint was gone from his lips. He was breathing. He looked up at her, his eyes streaming with tears, and whispered, "Thank you." Maggie sat back on her heels, the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving her trembling. "See?" Wade Thorne's voice cut through the silence. "Witchcraft. She poisoned him, and then she used her potions to cover the crime." The crowd hesitated. They had seen a man nearly die, and they had seen Maggie save him. But Wade's explanation was simpler. "He is right," another man said. "She knew exactly what to do. Too fast." "Tie her up," Wade ordered. Before anyone could move, a new voice spoke. It was low, calm, and carried more authority than Wade's shout. The mutton was spoiled. The men turned. Tovitsi stood at the tent flap. Naya was behind him, her small hand clutching his hide trousers. He walked into the tent, his moccasins making no sound. The railroad crew parted for him. He knelt where Finn had been sick. He did not touch the mess, but he leaned close, inhaling. He then walked to the large stew pot still simmering over the fire. He dipped a wooden spoon in, pulled it out, and smelled the broth. He looked at Deacon Crowell, who had just arrived, his face a mask of official concern. "You mixed old meat with the new," Tovitsi stated. It was not a question. "The mutton grease is sour. It is the same sickness we found near the dry river, not poison, just filth." Deacon bristled. "How dare you accuse my supply line?" "I accuse no one," Tovitsi said. He held up the spoon. "I smell the truth. The woman used medicine. The man is alive." Wade Thorne stepped toward Tovitsi. "This is not your affair, Comanche. This is white man's law." Tovitsi looked at him, his expression flat. "I came to trade. This argument is bad for trade. Silas." He turned to the cook tent owner, who was trying to blend into the canvas. "Your stores are now tainted. The men will not eat them. They blame this woman." He pointed to the sacks of flour, beans, and cornmeal stacked in the corner. "I will buy these. All of them. I will trade 50 cured bison hides and 2 sacks of black salt. A fair trade? You can buy new food. The argument ends." Silas's eyes widened. It was a good offer? A way out? "No," Deacon Crowell said, stepping forward. His voice was final. "That is a generous offer, Chief, but these goods are now evidence, and this woman is a material witness." Deacon smiled, a thin, dry expression. "Silas, you and I have business. You are behind on your payments for this contract, over $100, if my ledger is correct." "That is a lie," Silas sputtered. "I paid you last month." "I have your marker," Deacon said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. "And your contract is forfeit. I am seizing your assets to cover the debt. That includes this tent, these provisions, and your hired help." He turned to Maggie. "You, madam, are now in my custody. Wade, secure the witness. We will hold her in the supply shed until we can get a marshal out here to investigate this attempted murder." Maggie's blood ran cold. She knew what this was. She had seen it before. There was no marshal coming. She was being seized, but she was truly being sold. Deacon wanted her silenced because she knew the stew was just thin, not poisoned. He had given her bad meat to stretch the rations. The missing mule was just a cover. Wade Thorne smiled. It was a terrible sight. "My pleasure. Deacon, I will keep her safe." He grabbed Maggie's arm again. This time, she did not fight. It was useless. The entire camp was against her. They dragged her out of the light of the cook tent and shoved her into a dark, hot shed that smelled of burlap and dried apples. The heavy wooden bar dropped into place on the outside, sealing her in. She was alone in the dark. She felt the scar on her wrist. She had wanted to be needed. Instead, she had been discarded. She slid down the wall, buried her face in her knees, and refused to cry. Hours passed. The sounds of the camp faded as the men drank themselves into a stupor. Maggie must have slept, because she awoke to a tiny, scratching sound. The shed had no windows, but a sliver of moonlight showed under the door. A small shadow blocked it. The canvas flap that covered a ventilation hole near the floor lifted. Naya's face appeared. The girl's eyes were huge in the darkness. She put her finger to her lips. Maggie crawled forward. Naya pressed something into her hand. It was a small, sharp knife, the kind used for skinning rabbits, its blade worn smooth. With it was a long, tough thong of leather. Naya whispered one word, "Soon." The flap dropped. The girl was gone. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. She waited. She did not know how long. A shout split the night. "Fire the coal shed, fire!" She heard the panic, the sound of running boots, of men yelling. The coal shed was at the far end of the camp, but it was dry as tinder. The bar on her door lifted. The door swung open. Tovitsi stood there, silhouetted against the distant orange glow of the fire. The night air was filled with smoke. He did not speak. He held out his hand. She took it. His grip was not like Wade's. It was not a vice. It was a solid, living thing, warm and dry. He pulled her out of the shed. "Wade," she whispered. "The fire threatens the whiskey tent," Tovitsi said, his voice a low rumble. "He is busy." He led her through the chaos. The smoke was a perfect screen, burning her eyes but hiding them. Men ran past, carrying buckets, their faces streaked with soot. No one saw them. 2 horses were tethered behind the ruined chimney of the old assay office. They were Comanche ponies, small and tough. He looped the leather thong Naya had given her into a makeshift rein for one. He lifted her onto its bare back as if she weighed nothing. He mounted his own in one smooth motion. They did not run. They walked the horses calmly through the thickest smoke, past the edge of the camp, and into the open darkness of the plains. They rode in silence for what felt like an V. The moon was high. The only sound was the soft thud of the pony's hooves on the dry earth. Maggie's hands were raw from gripping the leather thong. She was free, but she was riding into a world she did not know, with a man she did not know. He stopped his horse. She stopped beside him. He looked at her, his face carved by moonlight and shadows. "With me," he said, and his voice was not unkind. "You will be called by your name, not your accusation." Maggie Odell looked back at the faint, angry glow of Crossspur. Then she looked at the silent man beside her. She nodded once. "My name is Maggie." He nodded. "I am Tovitsi." He urged his horse forward, and she followed, keeping a small, polite distance. They rode on, the hard rhythm of the horses the only sound. After another hour, Maggie listened intently. The sound of his horse's gait was wrong. She heard a faint squeak of leather on leather, an uneven friction. "Stop," she said. He reined in instantly, his hand dropping to his side. He trusted no one. She realized. She slid off the pony. Her legs were shaking. She walked toward him, holding her hands up slightly, showing they were empty. "Your saddle, it is rubbing." He watched her, his eyes narrow. She stepped close to his horse. It was not a saddle, but a complex rigging of leather pads. One of the cinches was loose, and the metal ring was chafing the horse's side. It would be raw by morning. Maggie did not hesitate. She reached down, grabbed the hem of her sturdy petticoat, the only thing she owned in the world besides the dress on her back, and ripped a long, clean strip of cotton. Tovitsi tensed as she moved near his leg, but she ignored him. She knelt in the dust. She spoke softly to the horse, her voice a low murmur she used to calm the men. She found the chafing ring and wrapped the cotton strip tightly around it, padding it, securing the end with a quick, tight knot. She smoothed the new bandage with her hand. "There," she whispered. "That will not rub raw now." She stood up and stepped back. Tovitsi had watched her every move. He watched her tend to his horse with the same practical, no-nonsense care she had used on the dying man in the tent. He looked at the padded cinch. He looked at her, standing in the moonlight, covered in dust, her petticoat torn. He said nothing. He just nudged his pony forward. Maggie mounted her own horse. They rode on, deeper into the vast, cold emptiness of the plains. They rode until the false dawn, that gray, watery light that promises a sun that has not yet risen. Tavitsi finally led them into a shallow ravine, hidden by juniper and rock. There were 3 other lodges, small, portable, and well hidden, the rest of his small band. A few figures emerged, older men and women, their face creased by sun and worry. They greeted Tavitsi with low words. Naya ran from one of the lodges and hugged his leg, her eyes finding Maggie immediately. The child's gaze was curious, but not hostile. Tavitsi spoke to his people. Maggie could not understand the words, but the tone was calm, informative. He gestured to her. All eyes turned to her. She stood by the pony, her dress stiff with dust, her hands raw. She felt like a stray dog, brought in from the cold, uncertain if it would be fed or kicked. An older woman, her hair in 2 gray braids, nodded at Maggie. Naya brought her a water skin and a piece of cold, dry meat. Maggie took it, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. The child nodded. Tavitsi pointed to a small lodge. "Rest," he said. "We move at sunrise." Maggie crawled inside. A pile of soft bison hides lay on the ground. It was more comfortable than she had known in months. She lay down, the knife Naya had given her still clutched in her hand. She did not sleep, but the world went gray at the edges. Back in Cross Spur, the sun rose on a scene of chaos. The coal shed was a pile of smoking ash. The whiskey tent was half burned. Wade Thorne kicked a charred timber, his face black with soot and rage. "She is gone," he spat. "That red bastard took her." Deacon Crowell joined him, picking fastidiously at a bit of ash on his clean coat. The fire was a distraction. Clever, but not clever enough. Wade pointed to the ground. "They rode out fast. 2 horses, heading north into the broken lands. I can find them." Deacon put a hand on his arm. "Finding them is not the priority. Wade, bringing her back is—" Quietly. Wade looked at him, confused. "Quietly after she poisoned Finn and burned your shed." "She did not poison Finn," Deacon said, his voice low and bored. "The mutton was bad. My mutton. Silas was going to complain. Now he cannot. He has run, and his contract is mine." He smiled. "And she did not burn the shed. The Comanche did. See how simple a savage raid? An attempted poisoning. A kidnapping." Wade began to understand. "You want to clear them out." "I want a freight depot." Deacon corrected him. "And this buffer zone is in my way. The railroad commissioners will approve my expansion if the territory is secured." A forced confession from the white woman, testifying that the Comanche kidnapped her to silence her. That they are raiding our supplies would be very persuasive. Wade's eyes lit up. "A confession." "Take 3 men," Deacon said. "Not your usual loudmouths. Take the trackers. I want her back, unharmed, but terrified. Get her to sign a paper I will draft. Then you can dispose of the Comanche problem as you see fit." Wade looked at the tracks again. He knelt. "This horse," he said, touching the edge of a print. "The left foreshoe is worn thin on the outside, a sloppy Smith. It is like a signature." He stood up. "I will find him." "Good," Deacon said. "Bring me my witness. Make her understand the wisdom of cooperation." 100 miles north. Maggie awoke to the smell of smoke, but it was different from the acrid smoke of the coal fire. This was clean, sharp. She emerged from the lodge. The sun was up. The small camp was already being dismantled. Naya was grinding something on a flat stone. The older woman was packing herbs into hide bags. Tavitsi was by the fire, but it was not a normal fire. He had a bed of coals, and on it, he had placed several flat, gray stones. Maggie, driven by a lifetime of habit, went to the packs. She saw a sack of cornmeal. "I can make journey bread," she said, her voice rough from the smoke. The older woman, who Tovitsi called Atsa, looked at her. Maggie pointed to the cornmeal, then to the fire. "Biscuits, flat cakes. It will be fast." She reached for a greased skillet resting in the wagon. Tovitsi's hand closed over her wrist. It was not violent, but it was firm. He stopped her. "No," he said. Maggie froze. "But breakfast, we need to eat." "We do not cook in that." He pointed to the skillet. The bottom was coated in old, black fat. It was the same skillet Silas had used, and he had never cleaned it properly. "It is seasoned," she argued, pulling her wrist free. "It just needs to be heated." "The old grease is rancid," he said. "It sours the food. It makes my stomach sick." He gestured to the fire. "We use stone. The fire burns the old food off. The stone gets hot. It cooks clean." He took a small piece of dough Naya had prepared and slapped it onto one of the hot stones. It sizzled instantly, puffing up, the smell of toasted corn filling the air. Maggie watched. It was simple. It was clean. It was brilliant. She thought of the countless men she had seen doubled over with cramps from rancid fat. She thought of Finn. "Your hands," Tovitsi said, looking at her. "I saw you at Crossspur. You wash, you scrub with sand. You do not mix the raw with the cooked. Your hands make safe food. That is what my group needs." The words hit her harder than Wade's fist. Safe food. Not fast food. Not cheap food. Safe. He was not just offering her a job. He was acknowledging her skill, her method. She nodded. "I can learn the stones." They traveled all day, moving north and west, away from the railroad, away from the flat plains and into rougher country. Maggie rode the pony, her muscles screaming in protest, but she did not complain. Late in the afternoon, Naya, who scouted ahead of the group like a small, quick bird, suddenly stopped. She darted into the bushes and came back, her face serious. She held something out to Tovitsi. It was a small brass shell casing. Maggie, riding behind him, saw it clearly. It was new. The brass was shiny, not tarnished by weather. Tovitsi rolled it in his palm. He looked at the mark on the bottom. 44, he said, his voice a low growl. He looked at the trail ahead. Someone is in front of us. "A hunter?" Maggie asked. "No trapper wastes this, and not this deep. This is a soldier's bullet, or a bounty man's." Maggie looked at him, at his strong frame, at the lines of exhaustion and loneliness around his eyes. She had seen that look on other men, the men in the camp, trying to buy comfort for an hour. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice quiet but hard. "You need me for cooking, or do you need me for something else?" She had to know. She would not be that woman. Not again. Tovitsi was very still. He looked at her, and she saw a flash of surprise, then something like sadness. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the heat from his body. "My nights are lonely. Maggie Odell," he said, and his honesty was a physical blow. "I have not been with a woman since Naya's aunt died, but I do not buy people. I do not trade for bodies." He held her gaze. "You are here because you are in danger, and because I need your skill. If you stay, it is because you choose. When this trade is done, in 3 weeks, I will take you to any town you wish. You will be paid. You will be free." She searched his face for a lie. She found none. She only found a man as tired and as cornered as she was. He turned to go to his lodge. "Wait," she said. He stopped. "If I stay," she said, "I am not a prisoner, and I am not a wife." "You are a cook," he agreed. "Then there have to be rules," she said, the words coming out faster now. "Rules for this?" He turned back to her. "Yes, rules are good." "What are they?" He thought for a moment. 1. We speak the truth. You do not lie to me. I do not lie to you. About the hunt, about the food. Anything. She nodded. And 2. We do not abandon. I will not leave you. You will not run. We face this together. If you run, you will die. Wade will find you. I will not run, she said. 3, he said, and his voice dropped. We do not touch, not without asking, especially at night. The lodges are small. The nights are cold, but there will be no touch unless the words are spoken by you or by me, and the other agrees. A rule for loneliness. A rule for respect. It was more than Seamus had ever offered her. I agree, she said. A small, quiet understanding passed between them. The tension in her shoulders eased for the first time in days. She reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out the small, sharp knife Naya had given her. She held it out to him, handle first. I do not need this, she said. I am not a fighter. He looked at the knife, then at her. He took it. I am a cook, she said, her voice finding its strength. I will need an apron and a wooden spoon. A faint smile touched the corner of Tavitsi's mouth. Atsa has cloth. I will carve you a spoon. He turned and disappeared into his lodge. Maggie went to her own, and for the first time since Seamus died, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The rhythm of the next few days was unlike anything Maggie had ever known. It was a life dictated by the sun and the horizon, not by a foreman's whistle or the bell of a cook tent. They moved steadily, keeping to the low places, following dry creek beds that offered soft footing and cover from the vast, open sky. Atsa, the older woman, had given Maggie a length of thick canvas, and Maggie had fashioned it into a serviceable apron. Tavitsi had kept his word. The second night, sitting by the fire, he had taken a piece of cured juniper wood and, with the small knife Maggie had returned to him, he had carved her a spoon. It was heavy, the bowl slightly off-center, the handle thick, but it was solid. When she held it, she felt grounded. She established her kitchen. It was not a place, but a process. At every camp, she took the flat stones Tavitsi had selected and set them in the heart of the fire. While they heated, she organized the supplies. She strung a length of rawhide between 2 poles, using it to dry the clothes she used for cleaning, and to hang bundles of herbs Atsa gathered along the trail. She taught Naya to render the rabbit fat into a clean tallow, which they stored in small clay jars. Naya became her shadow. The girl was bright, her eyes missing nothing. Maggie, remembering the filth of the cook tent at Crossspur, began to teach her. There are 3 rules, Maggie said, as they scrubbed their hands with sand and water from the barrel. Clean hands, clean knife, clean water. Naya looked at her own hands, scrubbed raw. Clean hands, she repeated, the English words careful in her mouth. Clean knife, Maggie said, showing her how to scour the blade with sand after cutting meat, before she ever touched a vegetable. The sickness lives in the old blood. Clean knife, Naya echoed. And clean water, Maggie finished, pointing to the drinking water barrel, covered with a damp hide, and the separate, uncovered bucket for washing. We never mixed them, ever. The girl nodded, her expression serious. This was a ritual she understood. It was practical, and it had immediate results. The food they ate was simple, mostly corn cakes baked on the hot stones and a thick stew of dried meat and wild onions. But it was clean. No one in the small band suffered the cramps and fevers that had plagued the railroad crew. They stopped at a trading post, a place that was not a town, just a collection of sod huts built into the side of a bluff. This was a crossroads for people who belonged to nowhere, families of mixed blood. Mexican traders and men who had left the army lived in a tense, quiet harmony. They were the people who lived between the worlds, trusted by neither the white towns nor the tribal camps. Tavitsi was respected here. Maggie watched as he traded. He spoke Spanish to one man, his own tongue to another, and quiet, sparse English to a third. He traded Atsa's dried herbs and 2 perfect bison hides for black salt from the far desert, a bag of lead shot, and 2 sacks of flour. He was a provider, a negotiator. He moved with a purpose that was not about greed, but about survival. While he traded, a woman with a baby on her hip offered Maggie a drink of cool water from a well. The woman's eyes were kind. "You are with his group?" she asked in English. "I am cooking for them," Maggie said. "He is a good man," the woman said, looking toward Tovitsi. "He keeps his word, not like the men building the iron road. They just want the land. They do not want the people." The woman's words settled in Maggie's mind. He keeps his word. They left the trading post and pushed north. The sky, which had been a clear, relentless blue, began to change. The color bled out of it, leaving a pale, sickly yellow. The air grew still. The insects stopped chirping. "Tie down the packs," Tovitsi ordered, his voice sharp. He looked at the horizon. "It comes." Maggie was in the middle of preparing the evening meal. She had a pot of corn and rabbit stew simmering on a grate over the coals. A dry, hot wind, smelling of dust, hit them. It was not a breeze, but a shove. "Atsa Naya the water," Tovitsi yelled. The world went brown. The sun vanished. The wind screamed, a high, thin sound that Maggie felt in her teeth. It was not a storm. It was a wall of dirt, a moving mountain of the plains itself. "The soup!" Naya cried, running to Maggie. The grit was everywhere, blinding them, filling their mouths. Maggie grabbed Naya, pulling the girl against her, shielding her face with her apron. "The hide," Maggie choked, pointing to a spare bison hide folded on the pack mule. "Get it." Tovitsi had heard. He materialized out of the brown haze, the hide in his hand. "The barrel!" Maggie screamed over the wind. "Wet it!" He did not question her. He plunged the hide into the washing bucket, soaking it. The precious water turned to mud. "Cover the fire." Together, they wrestled the heavy, wet hide, fighting the wind. They draped it over the fire pit, creating a low, tight dome. Maggie shoved Naya under it. "Hold the pot lid," she commanded. Maggie and Naya huddled in the dark. Hot space. The hide snapped and cracked in the wind, like a cannon shot. Dust forced its way in, coating their skin, making the air thick and unbreathable. Maggie held the iron lid of the soup pot down with all her strength, her arms aching. Naya coughed beside her, a dry, racking sound. Maggie pulled the girl's head into her lap, covering her mouth with a piece of her canvas apron. She had no idea how long they stayed there. It felt like a lifetime. The sound of the wind was the scream of the boiler, the end of the world. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The wind died. The silence was absolute. Maggie pushed the hide back. The world was unrecognizable. Everything was buried under a layer of fine, red powder. The sun was a dull copper coin in a brown sky. Atsa and the other men emerged, looking like ghosts, their faces caked with filth. Tovitsi was already checking the horses, his face a grim mask. Naya crawled out, spitting dust. She looked at Maggie. "The soup?" Maggie lifted the heavy iron lid. A fine layer of grit covered the top, but beneath it, the stew was hot. It was protected. She took her new wooden spoon and scraped the dirty layer off the top. Sacrificing the first inch, she ladled the clean, hot stew beneath it into a tin bowl and handed it to Naya. Naya drank it, her eyes closing. Maggie served the others. The stew was gritty, but it was hot, and it was food. They had not lost their meal. They had not lost their water. Tovitsi came to her last. She filled a bowl for him. He took it, his eyes meeting hers over the rim. He studied her face, her hair matted with mud, her eyes red from the smoke and dust. He looked at the hide she had used to save the meal. He gave a single, sharp nod. It was enough. It was more than enough. 2 days later, they saw the riders, a patrol of 6 cavalrymen, their blue uniforms filmed with dust. They were not on the main trail. They were scouting. Tovitsi's band stopped. The soldiers fanned out, their rifles held across their saddles. A young lieutenant, his face burned raw by the sun, rode forward. "Hold there, Chief. We're looking for raiders." "We are traders," Tovitsi said, his hands resting on his horse's neck. "Moving to the winter grounds." "We heard about the trouble at Cross Spur," the lieutenant said, his eyes scanning their packs, lingering on Maggie. He was surprised to see a white woman. "A poisoning, a fire. A woman was taken. This woman." Maggie's heart stopped. "This woman cooks for us," Tovitsi said calmly. "We bought supplies from the freight man. Silas, he was leaving. She was leaving. We hired her. There was no trouble." The lieutenant was suspicious. "I will need to search your packs, and I will need to speak to the woman, alone." Tovitsi tensed. Maggie saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. This could turn bloody in a second. Maggie stepped forward, slipping off her pony. She walked toward the lieutenant, her hands empty. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "my name is Maggie Odell. I was a widow working for Silas. He sold his contract to Mr. Crowell, and my job was finished. These folk offered me fair pay for a 3-week ride. I took it. I was not taken." Her words, spoken in her clear Irish lilt, shifted the balance. She was not a cowering captive. The lieutenant looked from her to Tovitsi. He was still uncertain. "We are in order to check all bands. We have reports of stolen goods." Tovitsi spoke, his voice mild. "You are far from your supply line, Lieutenant, and you are riding north, toward the Confluence Ford." "What of it?" the lieutenant asked. "My scout says the river is low, lower than it has been in 10 summers. Your wagons will not cross there. The mud will take them." The lieutenant's arrogance faltered. This was valuable information. Tovitsi gestured to his own packs. "We have fresh corn cakes. My cook made them this morning. Your men look hungry." Maggie saw the opening. She went to the pack, retrieved the pouch of corn cakes she had baked on the stones at dawn, and handed it to Tovitsi. Tovitsi rode forward and held the pouch up to the soldier. The lieutenant hesitated. To accept food was to accept peace. He looked at his men. They were tired. He took the pouch. "Thank you." He unwrapped a cake. It was clean, yellow, and smelled of smoke and corn. He bit into it. "Tell your captain," Tovitsi said, "to cross at the south bend, 20 miles downriver. The rock shelf is exposed. His wagons will be safe there." The lieutenant chewed, nodded. He was processing the information, the gesture, the presence of the white woman. This did not look like a band of hostile raiders. "We appreciate the information," he said gruffly. "And the food? Carry on." He turned his horse, gave an order, and the patrol rode away, heading south. The group was silent as they watched them go. Naya let out a breath she had been holding. Tovitsi turned his horse and looked at Maggie. He had not used a weapon. He had used her corn cakes. And the truth, he had used her. But this time, she did not feel used. She felt useful. The nights grew colder. The dry autumn was giving way to the first true chill. One evening, Naya, who had been coughing since the dust storm, began to shiver. By the time they made camp, the girl was burning with fever. She huddled in her blankets, her teeth chattering. Atsa made her a hot tea of willow bark, but the girl was restless, crying softly. Maggie watched, her hands clenched. This she knew. This was not food, but it was care. She waited until Atsa sat back, her face a mask of worry. "May I?" Maggie asked, pointing to Naya. Atsa looked at her, then at Tovitsi, who stood in the lodge opening. He nodded. Maggie went to work. She took 3 of the small cloth bags they used for flour and filled them with sand. She set them by the fire until they were almost too hot to touch. She crawled into the small lodge. Naya looked at her, her eyes huge and bright. Maggie wrapped the hot sandbags in spare clothes and tucked them around the girl's small, shivering body, one by her feet, one at her back, one against her stomach. Naya sighed, the warmth sinking in. The violent shivers began to ease, but she was still restless, whimpering. Maggie sat beside her. She did not know what else to do. She put her hand on the girl's forehead, smoothing back her damp hair. Without thinking, she began to hum. It was a low, sad tune, a melody her own mother had sung back in Cork, a song about the sea and a home she would never see again. She began to sing the words, her voice barely a whisper. Oro se do beata abhaile. It was a language none here understood, but the melody was universal. It was comfortable. It was the sound of a woman tending to a child. Naya's breathing deepened. Her eyes fluttered, and she slept. Maggie stayed there, singing the same verse over and over, her hand on Naya's chest, until the girl's feverish skin grew cooler. She did not know he was there until a log shifted in the fire outside, and the light changed. Tovitsi was standing at the threshold of the lodge. He was not looking at Naya. He was looking at Maggie. His face was unreadable in the shadows, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. He had been listening. He had stood there, watching this strange white woman sing his niece to sleep with a song from a dying world. He stood in the darkness, a man defined by his own loneliness, watching her fill a space in his lodge that had been empty for too long. He turned, silent as a shadow, and went to take the first watch. The next morning, Naya was weak, but her fever was gone. She was sitting up, chewing on a piece of dried meat. Maggie stepped out of the lodge, stretching her stiff back. The air was sharp, tasting of frost. Tovitsi was by the horses. He was not looking at the sunrise. He was looking at the ground. He knelt, his body tense. Maggie walked over. "What is it?" He pointed. In the soft earth, just at the edge of their camp, was a boot print. It was not a cavalry boot. With its sharp heel, this one was rounded, worn down on one side. "That is not yours," Maggie whispered. "No," Tovitsi said. He stood up and went to the pack mule. He ran his hands along the tether ropes. He found one, near the cinch. He held it up. Maggie looked. It had been cut, sawed almost all the way through with a dull knife. It was designed to fray and snap when the mule was climbing, sending the pack their food, their salt crashing into a ravine. It was sabotage. Maggie felt a cold sickness rise in her. She remembered the lieutenant. He said Deacon Crowell is bidding for the freight depot, that he needs to prove the land is secure. Tovitsi nodded, his eyes cold as the morning. "He needs a violent incident." Wade Thorne had not just been following. He had been here, in their camp, while they slept, while she sang to Naya. He was not just hunting them. He was toying with them. He was setting the board. Maggie looked at Tovitsi. She had fled Crossspur to escape a debt, but now she is more indebted than ever. Her safety was bought by his protection. His family was in danger because of her. She thought of Seamus, of the crushing weight of relying on a man who could be erased in an instant. This feeling, this safety, was a trap. It was a debt that she could not repay, and it was a debt that Wade Thorne was coming to collect. The discovery of the boot print and the sabotaged rope changed everything. The weariness of the trail was replaced by a sharp, cold dread. Tovitsi's face became a mask of stone. He did not waste time on anger. He gave a single, sharp order to break camp. There was no more teaching, no more quiet observation. There was only urgency. He pushed them hard for 2 days, moving through the hottest part of the day, resting only when the horses demanded it. Maggie watched him. He was a different man. The patient guide was gone, replaced by the warrior who had scouted for the cavalry. He read the land. not for comfort, but for traps. He took them on paths that seemed impossible, up sheer rock faces where the ponies scrambled for footing, through thick brush that tore at their clothes. He was pushing them toward Confluence Ford, the crossing point he had warned the lieutenant against. It was their only path to the winter camps. They arrived late in the afternoon of the second day, and Maggie understood Tovitsi's warning. The river, which should have been wide and powerful, was a series of muddy pools connected by a shallow, sluggish stream. The broad riverbed was a cracked, dry plain of baked mud and bleached stones. "He was right," Maggie whispered, looking at the expanse. "The wagons would have sunk to their axles." The group was exhausted. The forced march had drained them. Even Atsa's face was gray with fatigue, and Naya had fallen asleep on her pony, her small body swaying. The horses stood with their heads low, their sides heaving. "We rest here," Tovitsi said. "We cross at the moonset. 3 hours." They made a cold camp. No fire. They ate dry meat and the last of the corn cakes. It was not enough. The food was sawdust in their mouths. Maggie looked at the men, at Atsa. They were depleted. They would not have the strength to fight, or even to run, if Wade found them now. She looked at the pack mule that Wade had sabotaged. She had retied the rope, but she had also inspected every pack. In one, she had found a sack. It was heavy. It was full of bones, leftover bones from the rabbits and the one antelope they had taken. She had planned to use them for broth later. Now it was later. "Tovitsi," she said. He was on a rise, watching their back trail. He turned. "I need a fire, a small one, between the rocks." "No fire," he said. "Smoke." "No smoke," she insisted. "Dry wood, just coals. I can make food, not journey food, real food. They are dying on their feet." He stared at her, then at his people. He saw the truth in her words. He nodded. Maggie went to work with a singular, fierce energy. She had Naya and Atsa gather the driest, deadest branches, wood that would burn hot and clean. She built her fire in a deep crevice, shielded by stone. While it burned down to coals, she took the bag of bones and a hatchet. She laid the bones on a flat rock and, with a strength she did not know she possessed, she cracked every one. She split the long leg bones, exposing the dark, rich marrow inside. She filled her largest pot with water from the barrel, added the bones, a handful of Atsa's dried onions, and the last of the black salt. She set it on the glowing coals. For 2 hours, the pot simmered. The smell that rose from it was not the thin scent of rabbit stew. It was deep, rich, and primal. It was the smell of fat, of life. When it was ready, she ladled the hot, oily broth into their tin cups. "Drink," she told them. "Drink it all." Maggie watched them. They drank. The effect was immediate. Color returned to Atsa's cheeks. The men sat up straighter. Naya, awakened by the smell, drank her portion and held the cup out for more. It was a potent, life-giving draught, a miracle drawn from scraps. Tovitsi took his cup last. He drank the broth slowly, letting the heat sink into him. He looked at her over the rim, his eyes unreadable, but he held the cup up in a small salute before he drank the last drop. Just as they were cleaning the pot, a man rode into their camp. He was a Mexican trader, one they had seen at the sod huts. He was riding hard. He spoke to Tovitsi in rapid Spanish. Maggie could not follow, but she heard 2 names clearly, Wade Thorne and Soldados. When the man left, Tovitsi's face was grim. "What is it?" Maggie asked. "Rule 1, he said, truth. Wade is smart. He did not follow us. He rode south. He set a fire at a hay farm near the railroad line. He left Comanche signs. Now, he has spread a rumor that my band is raiding horses." "The cavalry," Maggie said, the blood draining from her face. "The lieutenant, he will believe it." "Yes, the soldiers are not looking for us here. They are riding south, looking for raiders." He pointed to the north, across the river. He has drawn them away. He wants us for himself. He knows we must cross here, and he wants to do it on a moonless night. Tonight. The preparations began. The air was electric. Tavitsi moved with a strained, painful urgency. He and the other two men were moving boulders, creating a small, defensible line near the riverbank. As he heaved a large stone into place, Maggie saw him wince, his hand going to his right shoulder. He tried to hide it, but he could not lift his arm above his chest. He barked an order to the other men and walked away from the firelight, into the shadows. Maggie found him by the horses. He was leaning against a pony, his eyes closed, his face pale with pain. "You are hurt," she said. It was not a question. "It is nothing, an old strain." "Rule 1, she said, truth." He opened his eyes. "I pulled it from the socket 2 winters ago. It is weak. The stone was too heavy." "Let me see." She did not wait for an answer. She went to her pack. She pulled out the small clay jar she had made, filled with tallow and the dried arnica Atsa had gathered. She returned to him. "Take off your shirt." He looked at her, his eyes suspicious in the darkness. "I am a cook," she said, her voice soft. "But I was a nurse before that. I patched up more railroad men than I can count. I will not hurt you." He hesitated. "We have a rule." "This is not night," she said. "This is medicine. I am asking, will you let me—" He thought for a long, silent moment. Then he nodded. Slowly, he unlaced the leather ties and shrugged out of his hide shirt. Maggie drew in a breath. His back and shoulders were a map of old scars, pale lines against his dark skin. But his right shoulder was swollen, the muscles knotted and tight. She opened the jar. The salve was cool and smelled of sage and pine. She scooped a generous amount onto her fingers. "This will be cold," she warned. She put her hands on him. Tavitsi went rigid. His skin was hot, his muscles like iron bands under her palms. She ignored his stillness and began to work, her hands sure and strong. She was not a wife, not a lover. She was a cook, a healer. She used her thumbs, pressing into the knot, breaking up the tension, spreading the cool grease. She worked in silence, her full attention on the muscle, on the pain. She felt the knot begin to soften under her hands. She felt his breathing deepen, a low sigh escaping him as the sharp pain eased into a dull ache. "You have good hands," he murmured, his voice thick. "They are clean hands," she said. When she was done, she wiped the grease from her fingers. "You must rest it. Do not lift anything else." He did not move to put his shirt on. The night air was cold, but the salve was working, a deep, penetrating heat. Maggie pulled her blanket from her pony. She wrapped it around her own shoulders and sat by the dying coals of her cook fire. He came and sat near her, not beside her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. He put his shirt back on, wincing. He pulled his own blanket, but he shivered. The cold was getting into his bones, and the pain made it worse. Maggie looked at him. She looked at the fire. It was just embers. "We will freeze before we cross," she said. He just nodded, his jaw tight. She sighed. She thought of her rules. She thought of his. She unwrapped her blanket. "Turn around," she said. He looked at her, confused. "Turn. Your back to me. It is warmer. My father taught me, in Ireland, when the peat ran low." He hesitated. This was not medicine. This was something else. "It is just warmth." "Tavitsi," she said, her voice tired. "Rule 3, I am asking to share a blanket, for warmth, nothing else." He held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw the deep, aching loneliness he had spoken of. He nodded. He turned his back to her. She sat behind him, their backs pressing together. She draped her own blanket, and then his, over both of them, cocooning them. The effect was instant. His body was a solid wall against hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, and her own warmth sinking into him. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing, slow and deep. The only sounds were the shallow whisper of the river and the shifting of the horses. The air smelled of her herbal salve, of wood smoke, and of him. It was a clean, male scent of dust and leather. They sat like that, in silence, for a long time. The tension of the trail, the fear of Wade, seemed to recede, held at bay by this small circle of shared heat. "My nights are too long," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt in her own back. Maggie leaned her head back, resting it against his good shoulder. "I know, but I have soup, and I have a fire, and," she added softly, "I have hands that know how to find peace." He did not speak, but she felt him relax against her. A small, involuntary sigh. It was a gesture of trust more profound than any word. She felt him begin to shift, to turn toward her. "No," she whispered. He stopped, instantly. "Wait," she said. "Wait until we are safe, until this is done." It was not a refusal. It was a promise. The tension between them was no longer fear. It was a thin, high note of something new. He settled back, their backs aligned. "We wait," he agreed. In the gray light before dawn, as they prepared to move, Naya came to Maggie. The girl was shy, her head down. She held something in her palm. "For you," she whispered. She pressed it into Maggie's hand. It was a necklace, a simple leather thong. On it were strung tiny, delicate bones, as white as pearls. "Fish," Naya explained. "From the clear river, from home." "It is beautiful, Naya." "To remember," Naya said, her dark eyes serious. "To remember the smell of home fire." Maggie felt a lump in her throat. She knelt and let Naya tie the necklace around her neck. The bones were cool against her skin. She had a spoon, she had an apron, and now she has a gift. Tovitsi watched, his face expressionless, but his eyes were soft. He turned back to the river. "It is time." He laid out the plan. They would cross here, in the shallows. He sent one of his men, a young man named Tave, to scout the far bank. He placed Atsa in charge of the pack mules. Maggie looked at her cook fire. "The smell," she said. "The stew. Wade will smell it. He will know we were here." Tovitsi had not thought of that. Maggie went to her herb bag. She pulled out a large bundle of dried sage. She threw it onto the last of the embers. A thick, pungent, aromatic smoke billowed up. It was not the smell of food. It was the smell of ritual, a smell that was common on the plains. It masked the rich scent of the marrow. "It will cover the trail," she said. Tovitsi nodded, impressed. "Good. The escape route. If he comes, we run for the tall reeds. Downstream. Do not stop. Do not fight." Just as they were about to lead the horses into the water, they heard a sound, a cry. It was weak, desperate. Tave, the scout, emerged from the brush. "Tovitsi, come!" They followed him. Tucked into a hollow by the riverbank was a broken-down wooden cart. A thin mule lay in its traces, near death. Huddled beside the cart was a young woman. Her clothes torn. She was Mexican, and she was holding a baby. The woman looked up, her eyes wild with terror. The baby let out a thin, mewling cry. It was not a cry of anger, but of starvation. "Agua," the woman whispered. "Por favor, el niño." Atsa clucked her tongue. "We cannot. We do not have time. We do not have supplies." The woman looked at Maggie, her eyes pleading. She held the baby out. It was tiny, its skin like parchment. Maggie looked at the baby, and then at Naya. She looked at Tovitsi. "We do not abandon," Maggie said, echoing his own rule. She went to her pack. She took one of the last water skins. She also took a small pouch of cornmeal. She knelt by the woman, gave her water. then mixed a thin, watery gruel for the baby. The woman wept as the baby drank. "The cart," Tovitsi said, looking at the broken wheel. "We cannot leave them. Wade will find them." He was making a choice that would cost them. He unhitched one of his own pack ponies. He tied it to the front of the cart. "We will pull her across, to the other side. She can follow the river south to the trading post." It was a terrible decision. It would be slow. It would be noisy. It would expose them on the open riverbed for minutes, not seconds. But he had made it. He and Tave hauled the cart, the pony pulling, the broken wheel scraping and groaning over the rocks. Maggie and Atsa helped the woman, half carrying her. They were in the middle of the ford, the mud sucking at their feet, when the sound echoed across the plains. It was not a yell, it was the sharp, flat crack of a rifle. A puff of dust exploded in the mud. 10 feet from the cart, Wade Thorne had arrived. The shot was a flat, ugly crack in the dawn. It was followed by a wet thwack as the bullet punched through a rawhide water skin on the side of a mule. Water exploded in a silver spray. "Reeds!" Tovitsi roared, shoving Naya toward the thicket downstream. "Run, Atsa! Take the woman, go!" Chaos erupted. Wade Thorne and 2 other men were on the ridge above them, black shapes against the pale sky. "Give me the woman, Comanche!" Wade's voice boomed across the ford. "I will let the rest of you crawl away." Another shot. This one was aimed. The lead pack mule, the one carrying half their food, screamed. It was a high, terrible sound that was cut short as the animal collapsed in the mud, its legs kicking. Tave and the other man fired back, their shots hurried, kicking up dust at the ridge. Maggie was frozen. She stood by her cook fire, by the body of the dying mule. The smell of the sage she had burned was thick in the air, but under it was the new, copper smell of blood. The Mexican woman and Atsa were dragging the cart through the mud, Naya pushing from behind, but they were slow, exposed. One of Wade's men, impatient, spurred his horse down the shallow bank, riding to cut them off. He was moving fast, his rifle up. Maggie looked at him. She looked at her fire, and she saw the pot. It was the pot she had used for the marrow broth, and in it was the leftover fat, the tallow she had rendered and saved. It was still sitting on the hot coals. It was clear, liquid, and scalding. Between her and the charging rider was a 10-foot wall of dried tumbleweeds, piled up by the last high water. She did not think, she acted. She grabbed her canvas apron, folded it thick, and seized the iron handle of the pot. The heat was intense, searing her hands even through the cloth. She lifted the heavy pot. With a cry that was half rage and half terror, she hurled the entire contents, a gallon of boiling fat, into the center of the dry brush. The whoosh was louder than a gunshot. The dry weeds and grass, soaked in atomized, boiling grease, exploded. A wall of orange flame erupted 20 feet into the air, a sudden, roaring monster of fire. The rider's horse screamed. It reared, its eyes wide with terror, its mane smoking. It was completely cut off by the inferno. The man fought for control, pulling the horse back, his face scorched by the heat. Naya, seeing the fire, seeing the confusion, pulled a small, polished antelope horn from her belt. She blew into it. A high, piercing, unearthly wail cut through the air, adding to the panic. Tovitsi used the moment. He was not a brawler. He was a strategist. He had his rifle. He fired once. His shot was not hurried. The man on the bank, the one fighting his horse, cried out, clutching his arm as he fell from the saddle. "Damn you!" Wade screamed from the ridge. A third man, who had been creeping, unseen, through the river mud, burst from the reeds. He was on Tovitsi before the warrior could turn. He lunged, a long knife in his hand. Tovitsi dropped his rifle, twisting, tackling the man low. They went down, crashing into the shallow water, a spray of mud and curses. Maggie screamed. Tovitsi was fighting for his life. The man was heavy, smelling of sweat and whiskey. He raised the knife. Tovitsi felt the pull in his bad shoulder, a sharp, searing pain. He roared, not in pain, but in fury, and slammed his forehead into the man's face. There was a wet crunch of cartilage. Wade, on the ridge, was trying to get a clear shot at the tangle of bodies. He fired. The bullet was wild. It tore through the buckskin on Tovitsi's left side, a deep, hot graze that sliced the flesh open. Tovitsi cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. But as the man above him recoiled from the headbutt, Tovitsi grabbed the man's hair and slammed his head. Once, twice, against a river stone. The man went limp. Wade fired again. The bullet whistled past Tovitsi's head, so close it nicked the cartilage of his ear. Blood, hot and sudden, ran down his neck. Tovitsi scrambled, grabbing for his rifle. He got to one knee. He was bleeding from his side and his head. The wall of fire was spreading, the smoke thick, blocking the ridge from the ford. Wade looked down. His 2 men were out of the fight. He was alone. The odds had changed. He looked at Maggie. She was standing by her fire, her hands smoking, her face a mask of soot and fury. "This is not over, widow!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "I will see you in Cross Spur. I will see you both hang." He wheeled his horse, dug his spurs in, and vanished into the smoke. Silence fell. It was heavier, more terrible than the noise. The only sounds were the crackle of the burning brush and the last, wet gasps of the dying mule. Tave and the other man, Tave's arm bleeding, ran back. They were alive. Atsa and Naya were safe, huddled with the terrified Mexican woman. Maggie ran to Tovitsi. He was on his feet, pressing a strip of cloth to his side. It was already dark. "Rule 1, he grunted, the words tight with pain. "He speaks the truth. He will go to Cross Spur." Maggie looked at the chaos. The dead mule, the bloody mud, the ruined supplies, the fire. The fear she had felt was turning into a cold, hard anger. "This," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This is your war. You brought me into your war." "No." Tovitsi pushed himself upright, away from her support. He winced, his face pale. "This is not my war. This is the war of greed. It is Deacon Crowell's war. He just uses Wade's hands." "His war?" Maggie's voice rose, cracking. "He sent Wade for me, because I would not let him poison Finn, because I know the truth." She grabbed the front of his bloody shirt. "I have to go back. I have to tell them. I can clear my name." "Clear your name?" He looked at her as if she were a child. "There is no name to clear. There is only Deacon's ledger. You are a line item he wants to erase. You go back there alone. You are dead before you speak." "And if I stay?" she challenged him, her eyes wild. "I am hunted. Your family is hunted. Naya is hunted. Because of me, I am your bad luck, just like they said at the camp." "You are not," Atsa said, her voice sharp. She was tending to Tave's arm. "You are warm soup. You saved us. You fought." Tovitsi ignored them. He was staring at the dead mule, at the sacks of flour and salt soaked in blood and river water. "He won," Tovitsi said, his voice flat. "Our supplies are gone. We cannot trade. We cannot reach the winter camp before the snow if we go the long way. We cannot feed the people for the feast." "Then what do we do?" Maggie asked, the fight draining out of her. Tovitsi looked north, at the sharp, broken teeth of the mountains. "We take the shortcut, through Screaming Stone Gorge." Atsa gasped. Tave looked at the ground. "Chief." "No," Tave muttered. "It is a bad place. The rocks, they make noise in the wind. The path is narrow. We will lose another horse. We will lose ourselves." "We will not," Tovitsi said, his voice final. "We will go fast. We will be at the winter camp in 2 days. Wade will think we are still in the plains. He will go to Cross Spur, but we will be safe." He turned to Maggie, His duty was clear, a straight, hard line. I must deliver this. What is left of it, I must speak to the elders. I must tell them the railroad is coming, that Deacon Crowell is pushing. My word is only strong if I keep it. I must finish the trade. Their goals were at war. She wanted to go back. He had to go forward. I cannot go with you, she said, her voice low. I cannot hide in your camp while that man tells lies about me. It is my name. That is all I have. You will, Tovitsi said. He walked to his pack, ignoring the pain in his side, and pulled something from a leather pouch. He came back to her. He pressed something cold and heavy into her palm. Rule 2. We will not abandon it. She opened her hand. It was an iron ring, thick and crudely made. Not a circle, but an oval. It was marked with 3 deep, parallel slashes. This is my family mark, he said. My promise. If we are separated, if Wade finds you, you show this. At any fort, to any soldier who once used me as a scout, they will know what it is. They will protect you. They will see you are under my word. She closed her hand around it. The metal bit into her skin. It was a promise of protection, but it felt as heavy as a chain. She kept it. They worked quickly. They helped the Mexican woman, giving her the last of their broth and a piece of dried meat. They pointed her cart south, along the river, toward the trading post. Dios la bendiga, the woman whispered, clutching Maggie's hand. Then the small band, now 1 mule short, 1 man wounded, turned north, toward the mountains. They made a cold camp that night, high on a rocky ledge. There was no cover. The wind was a living thing. It did not howl. It shrieked. It scraped across the rock formations. A high-pitched metallic whine, the sound of a giant file on a giant piece of steel. Maggie was huddled in her blanket, her back against the rock. The sound was in her ears, in her bones. Squeak, whine, scream. She was back in Omaha. She was not cold. She was hot. She smelled burning oil. She saw the white plume of steam just before the world exploded. She saw Seamus waving. No, she whispered, her hands flying to her ears. Maggie moved in a haze of terror and exhaustion. Her mind locked on Tovitsi's voice, counting his breaths. Her hand closed around the iron ring in her pocket. They emerged on the 3rd morning, not as a trading group, but as refugees. They stumbled out of the gorge onto a high, sheltered plateau, hidden from the plains by a ring of pine and aspen. The wind was gone. The silence was so profound. It felt as loud as the gorge had. Below them, tucked into a bend of a frozen river, was the winter camp. It was not a few lodges, but a village, 40 or 50 in all. Smoke rising and thin. Straight lines into the cold. Clear air. As they rode down the incline, people emerged. Their faces were anxious. They had been waiting. They were Tovitsi's family, his clan. Atsa, who seemed to have drawn new strength from the sight of home, rode ahead, but the people were not looking at her. They were looking at the newcomer. They were looking at Maggie. She sat on her pony, her dress in tatters, her face streaked with soot from the fire at the ford, her hair wild. The fishbone necklace Naya had given her was a stark white against her filthy skin. She was an omen, a stranger. She saw the suspicion in their eyes. They looked at Tovitsi, then at her, their expressions hardening. An old woman, older than even Atsa, stepped forward. Her face was a map of 100 hard winters. She held a smoldering bundle of sage. Atsa dismounted and went to her, embracing her. "Grandmother," she said. The old woman, the true elder, looked past her at Tovitsi. He dismounted, his movement stiff from his wounded side. He was home, but he was wounded, and he had brought a white woman. The elder woman approached Maggie. She did not speak. She simply walked a circle around her, waving the smoking sage, washing her in the sharp, clean scent. Maggie sat still, her heart hammering. This was not a welcome. It was a cleansing. It was an exorcism. When the woman was done, she looked at Tovitsi. He spoke, his voice low, tired, but carrying. He spoke for a long time in his own tongue. Maggie could not understand the words, but she heard the names: Wade Thorne, Deacon Crowell, Crossspur. He told them of the fight, the lost mule, the gorge. He pointed to Maggie. He said, "She fought. Her fire saved us." The elder woman nodded. Once. She turned and walked away. The welcome, such as it was over. People began to tend to their wounds. Tave was taken to a medicine lodge. Atsa and Naya were swept into a family embrace. Tovitsi was surrounded by the other men, his report continuing. Maggie was left alone. She slid from the pony, her legs buckling. She was an island, separate and unclean. In the middle of this family she had helped to save. Atsa returned, her face kind. "Come," she said. "You will be in our lodge, with Naya and me." The lodge was warm and smelled of pine and curing leather. Naya clung to Maggie, her small hand gripping Maggie's tattered skirt. The child's simple, trusting grip was the only anchor Maggie had. The next few days were a blur. News came. Scouts, who moved like ghosts between the white settlements and the camps, brought word. The first piece was from the trading post. The Mexican woman and her baby had arrived safely. She had told everyone of the Comanche chief who had saved her, and the white woman with fire who had fed her baby. The second piece of news was not good. Tave brought it to Tovitsi's lodge. His face was dark. "Deacon Crowell is at the fort," he said in low English, for Maggie's benefit. "He has a paper. He says it is your confession, Maggie, that you signed it." "I signed nothing," Maggie said, her stomach twisting. "He says you confessed to the poisoning, and that my uncle," he nodded at Tovitsi, "kidnapped you to start a war. He has convinced the marshal. They are assembling a detail. Not just soldiers, deputies, volunteers. Wade Thorne is guiding them." Tovitsi's face was grim. "He is creating his army. Legal." "That is not all," Tave said, his voice dropping. "Wade does not ride with them. Not yet. He told them he would meet them in 3 days. He is scouting. He knows we are here." "He is coming for me," Maggie whispered. "No," Tovitsi said. He looked at Naya, who was playing with the fishbone necklace. "He is coming for her. He knows I will not fight a marshal's posse. But if he has my niece, he can force me to trade. Me for her, or you for her. It does not matter. He wins." The camp was on edge. They were preparing for the feast of the first snow, but the threat from outside poisoned the air. Maggie felt the stares. She was the cause, the white woman who had brought the white man's war. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She went to the kitchens. It was not one kitchen, but many. The elderly women were preparing the sacred meal. Maggie watched. They were making corn cakes, but not on stones. They used a special, smooth rock slab, and they mixed the cornmeal with ash, which made the cakes light. They worked in a clean, rhythmic silence. But the center of it all was a single pot. It was old, black, and polished. It was the ritual pot. Atsa explained. "It is never washed with soap, only with sand and pure water. It is for the sacred stew. No blood must touch it. No anger must be near it." Maggie understood. This was not just cooking. This was faith. She sat and she watched for a full day. She just watched. She saw how they ground the corn, how they sifted the ash, how they tended the fire. On the second day, she asked, "May I grind?" The woman looked at her. Atsa nodded. Maggie took the stone and began to work, her rhythm matching theirs. She did not speak. She just worked. She ground the corn. She carried the water. She kept her hands clean. She was a cook. She knew kitchens. She respected the rules. Slowly, the suspicion in the women's eyes eased. She was not a white woman. She was a worker, quiet and respectful. She was honoring their pot. On the third day, a young warrior, one who had lost a brother at the hands of the cavalry, confronted Tovitsi in the center of the camp. His name was Kova. "You brought this!" Kove shouted, pointing at Maggie, who was carrying a skin of water. "You brought this omen. She is the shadow that brought the hunter. The soldiers are coming because of her. We should give her to them. Give her to Wade Thorn. Let him have what he wants. Let us have peace." Tovitsi stepped in front of Kova. His hand was on his knife. "She is under my protection. She is a guest. She saved my life." "She saved your life to take ours," Kove argued. "She is bad luck." "The bad luck comes from liars." Atsa's voice cut through the air. She walked into the circle, her face stern. "It comes from Deacon Crowell. It comes from Wade Thorn. This woman," she pointed at Maggie, "knows only how to feed, not how to hate. She is not in trouble." The camp was divided. Kove had his supporters. They were young, angry. Just then, a woman screamed. It was a sound of pure terror. "My son, he cannot breathe." A woman ran from a lodge, holding a small boy, perhaps 3 years old. The child was silent, his body rigid, his face turning a dark, dusky blue. He was choking. The woman was hysterical, pounding on his back. A piece of dried meat, tough and hard, was lodged in his throat. Atsa and the older woman rushed forward, trying to clear his airway. But the boy was too small, his throat too tight. He went limp. Maggie moved. She did not ask permission. She shoved the frantic mother aside. "Hold him," she commanded Tave, who was nearby. She stood behind the boy, wrapped her arms around his small chest, just below the ribs. She put her fist, her scarred, burned fist, against his belly. She pulled hard, a single, upward thrust. A small, dark piece of meat shot from the boy's mouth, landing in the dirt. The boy's body convulsed. He took a huge, ragged, screaming breath. The blue faded, replaced by a flush of red. He began to cry, a healthy, angry wail. Maggie collapsed against Tave, her legs weak. The entire camp had been watching. They were silent. The mother snatched her son, weeping, covering him in kisses. She looked at Maggie, her eyes streaming. She said nothing, but she bowed her head, a gesture of thanks so profound it needed no words. Kove, the young warrior, stared at the piece of meat in the dust. He looked at Maggie, at her pale, sweating face. He said nothing. He turned and walked away. The argument was over. That night, the camp held a small feast. The tension was broken. They were celebrating the child's life. The elder women came to Maggie. The eldest, the one with the sage, placed a hand on Maggie's head. Atsa translated. "She says you have a new name, a temporary name. Until you find your own, you are warm soup. You save the child from choking, but you also save the broth in the storm. You keep the belly full, you keep the heart warm, warm soup." Maggie wept. For the first time, she was not bad luck. She was warm soup. She was needed. Later, the drum started. A huge fire was lit in the center of the camp. It was a clear, cold night, the moon a perfect white circle in the sky. The people began to dance. Maggie sat near the fire, with Naya watching. She felt content. She did not belong, not really, but she was not an outcast. Tovitsi emerged from the shadows. He had put aside his torn shirt. He wore a clean, dark blue tunic. The bandage on his ear was gone. The cut on his side was healing. He looked different. He looked like a chief. He walked through the dancers. He stopped in front of her. The camp grew quiet, watching. He did not smile. He simply held out his hand. Maggie's breath caught. "I do not know how—" "You follow the drum," he said. "I cannot—" She was afraid of the stairs, afraid of this new feeling. "Rule 2, he said softly, so only she could hear. "We do not abandon. I am asking, dance with me." She put her hand in his. His grip was warm, solid. He pulled her to her feet. He led her into the circle. The dance was simple. A slow step, a turning, a movement with the circle of people. He did not let go of her hand. She followed his lead, her feet finding the rhythm of the drum. The people around them began to cheer. They stamped their feet. They were not mocking. They were approving. The drum beat faster. They were turning face to face. The heat from the fire was on her face. The heat from his hand was in her blood. He stopped in the center of the circle, though the dance continued around them. He looked at her, his eyes dark, reflecting the flames. "Rule 3, he whispered, his voice rough. Maggie's heart stopped. "I am asking," he said, "to touch, not like that, just—" He struggled for the words. He raised his free hand, slowly, and touched the fishbone necklace at her throat. His fingers brushed her skin. She shivered, but she did not pull away. "I am asking," he said again, "to put my face here." He touched his own cheek. She knew what he meant. It was a formal, public request. He was honoring her, in front of his people. She could not speak. She just nodded, her eyes locked on his. He leaned in. The cheering of the camp faded. The sound of the drum receded. There was only the smell of wood smoke and the clean scent of him. He did not kiss her mouth. He pressed his cheek, his rough, warm skin, against hers. He held it there for a moment, a gesture of profound, gentle intimacy. He was not talking. He was giving. He was sharing his home, his name, his face. Then he turned his head, just slightly. His lips brushed hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of promise. It was short, warm, and real. It was bread, fire, and water. It was the end of her loneliness. He pulled back. The cheers were loud now. Naya was jumping up and down. Maggie was breathless, her face burning. He smiled. It was the first time she had truly seen him smile. It transformed his face. The moment was broken by a sharp whistle. Tave was on the ridge above the camp. He whistled again. The signal. The drums stopped. The cheering died. Tove rode down into the camp, his face pale. "He is here," he said to Tovitsi. "Wade Thorn, in the woods, on the east ridge. I saw him. He is not attacking. He is watching." Tovitsi's smile vanished. He grabbed his rifle. "What is he watching?" "The granary," Tave said, "and the path, the one the children use, to the stream." A cold dread settled over the camp. Wade was not going to attack them. He was going to burn their food, or he was going to take their children. Tovitsi looked at the fire, at his people. He looked at Naya, who had run to hide behind Maggie. "He wants to draw me out," Tovitsi said, his voice hard. "He wants to fight me here. But if I fight him here, the soldiers will come. They will see a battle. Deacon will win." "What do we do?" Tave asked. "We cannot let him take the children." Tovitsi was silent for a long moment. He looked at the trail leading back toward the gorge, back toward Cross Spur. "We cannot defend," he said. "The snake is here, but the head is in Cross Spur." He turned to Maggie. His face was set. The decision made. "I am going back," he said. "I will not let him burn my home or steal my child to win his war. I will take the fight to him. I will go to Cross Spur. I will face Deacon." It was a desperate, mad plan. He would be walking into a trap, into a town that wanted him dead. "You are not," Maggie said, stepping forward. The dancer was gone. Warm soup was gone. The cook from Cross Spur was back, her face hard as iron. "You go there. You are a dead man," she said. "They will shoot you before you cross the street. You have no proof. You have no rights." "I have my word," he said. "And I," she said, her hand going to her pocket, "have the truth." She pulled out the iron ring he had given her. "You are not going alone. This is my fight, too. He used my name to start this. I will be the one to finish it. If you're going, I am going with you. I am your witness." The journey back to Cross Spur was the opposite of the flight from it. They were not running, they were hunting. They traveled fast. Tovitsi, Maggie, and a reluctant Tave. Naya, to Maggie's horror, had refused to stay. She had slipped onto her pony just as they left, her small face set. "I am a scout," she said, pointing to Tovitsi. "Rule 2, we will not abandon it." Tovitsi had looked at her, and at Maggie, and given a single, sharp nod. The risk was terrible, but her eyes were his. She was a warrior, too. They left the others and the horses hidden in the rocks miles from the town, and walked in on foot, arriving just after dawn. The town was a different place. The railroad crews were working with a frantic, angry energy. The mood was not just rough, it was poisonous. As they slipped through the alley behind the livery, Maggie saw it, nailed to the wall of the saloon. It was a piece of paper, a wanted poster. It was not an official marshal's notice. It was handwritten. It offered a $50 reward for the capture of Maggie Odell, the poisoner, and the Comanche renegade, Tovitsi, who had abducted her and burned the company coal shed. It was signed by Deacon Crowell, acting chief of security, Cross Spur Depot. "He has made himself the law," Maggie whispered, her mouth dry. "He was always the law," Tovitsi said, his voice grim. He just did not have a sign for it. They separated. Tave and Naya were to circle the camp, to watch. "Stay hidden," Tovitsi ordered his niece. "Your eyes, not your voice. Find Wade." Naya nodded and vanished into the shadows with Tave. "Where are we going?" Tovitsi asked Maggie. "To church," Maggie said. The small, clapboard chapel was at the far end of the settlement, away from the saloon and the railroad line. It smelled of dry wood and old hymn books. Reverend Gideon was sweeping the front steps. He was a thin man, with a kind, perpetually worried face. He had been the one to speak the words over her and Seamus, to drink tea with her afterward and tell her she was a civilizing presence. He looked up as they approached. His eyes widened, first in recognition, then in pure, unadulterated fear. He dropped his broom. "Maggie Odell, my child. What are you? You cannot be here." He was already backing away, toward the door of the church. "Reverend, please," Maggie said, holding her hands up. "I need your help." "Help?" He looked past her at Tovitsi, who stood like a silent, armed shadow. "You are with him. The notices. Maggie, they say you poisoned a man. They say you are a captive." "It is a lie. Reverend, all of it. Deacon Crowell wrote those lies. You know me. You knew Seamus." I know what I read," Gideon stammered, his hand on the church door. "Deacon is a pillar of this new community. He is bringing the railroad." "He is a murderer and a thief," Maggie said, her voice dropping. "He gave me spoiled meat. He tried to blame me for it. Now he has written a confession and signed my name to it." This gave the Reverend pause. He was a man of the word. A forgery was a sin he understood. "Your name, he showed it to me. The penmanship was elegant." "And mine is not." Maggie said, "You have seen my signature, on my marriage lines. You are the witness. You know my hand." Reverend Gideon went pale. He understood. He was being asked to choose. "Maggie, I cannot," he whispered. "Deacon, he runs everything. The supplies, the bank drafts. He is funding the new roof for this chapel. To go against him is to tell the truth." Maggie finished, her voice cold. "I am not asking you to fight, Reverend. I am asking you to look at a piece of paper and say what is true and what is a lie. That is all." "That is everything," he whispered, his eyes terrified. He looked at the saloon, then back at her. "I must pray on this. I cannot. Please, Maggie, you must go." He turned and fled into the dark sanctuary, barring the heavy door behind him. Maggie stood on the steps, defeated. The one man she thought would stand for the truth was a coward. We do not need him, Tavitsi said quietly. We need Crowell. We have no proof, Maggie said, her voice breaking. It is my word against his, and my word is wanted for murder. They heard a whistle, not a bird. It was Naya. She was in the alley across the street, waving them over, her small face urgent. They ran, heads down, across the dusty road. What is it? Tavitsi asked. Naya was breathing hard. Wade is not here. He is at the old cook tent, with 3 men, but I found this. She led them to the supply shed, the one that had been Maggie's prison. The back door, which opened onto the alley, was where Deacon received his private freight. Naya pointed. In the dirt, half buried near the step, was a small, round brass object with a wooden handle. It was a seal, the kind used to press into hot wax on important documents. Naya held up a piece of paper she had found stuck to a crate. It was a blob of red wax, and in it was an impression, a fancy D and C intertwined. The confession, Maggie breathed. It was sealed. With this exact seal, I saw it on the Reverend's desk. Deacon must have dropped it. Tavitsi picked it up. Proof, he said. This is his hand, if not his writing. It is not enough, Maggie said. He will say he lost it. He will say we planted it. Then we get more. Tavitsi said. His eyes were cold. The kitchen, your kitchen. The old cook tent was abandoned. Silas was long gone. The tent was still standing, but the flaps were torn. They slipped inside. It smelled of stale grease and rodent droppings. Maggie, Tavitsi said. Where? She knew. She went to the back, to the root cellar dug into the earth, where Silas used to keep the precious goods locked up. But Deacon was sloppy. He was arrogant. He had just thrown a new lock on it. Tavitsi did not bother with the lock. He used his knife and the heel of his boot to pry the entire rotten jam from the soft dirt wall. The door fell in with a crash. The smell that hit them was overwhelming. It was the smell of decay. He never moved it, Maggie whispered. She pointed. There, in the corner, was the barrel, the one the missing mutton had come from. It was green with mold, the fat a pale, congealed white, and next to it, the ledgers. She grabbed the heavy books. Silas had been a terrible cook, but he was a meticulous bookkeeper. He had to be. Deacon audited him weekly. She flipped the pages. Purchase, 1 barrel mutton, spoiled, from Deacon Crowell. Discount, 50%, signed, D.C. She held the book up, her hands shaking. I have it, I have him. A shadow fell across the tent entrance. I'd say you have just run out of time, widow. It was Wade Thorne. He stood there, a wide grin on his face, his rifle leveled at her chest. 2 of his men fanned out behind him. And you, he said, looking at Tavitsi. I knew you were too proud to stay hidden. You should have let me burn your camp. It would have been cleaner. Wade, a small voice said. Everyone turned. Naya was standing by the water barrels, 10 feet to Wade's left. She had her small rabbit knife in her hand. Wade laughed. Well, look at this. The whole family. Get out, Naya, Tavitsi said, his voice a low command. He had not moved. His hand was not near his gun. She is not going anywhere, Wade said, in a motion so fast Maggie almost missed it. He lunged, grabbing Naya by the hair. He hauled her back, pressing the muzzle of his pistol to her small head. Naya cried out, dropping her knife. Now, Wade said, his grin gone. We do this my way. Chief, drop the rifle. Kick it over here, or I will scatter her brains all over this tent. 1, 2. Tavitsi did not hesitate. He unslung his rifle and dropped it. He kicked it across the dirt floor. It spun to a stop at Wade's feet. The knife, too, Wade ordered. Tavitsi pulled it from his belt and threw it down. Hands up, both of you. Maggie and Tavitsi raised their hands. Maggie was still clutching the ledger. "Eh, always the bookkeeper," Wade sneered.
Drop it.
Maggie let the ledger fall into the dirt. "This is perfect," Wade said. "I was just going to shoot you both, but this is better. Deacon will be so pleased." He started to drag Naya backward, out of the tent. A tragic confrontation. The fugitives are found. They resist. The child is caught in the crossfire. A Comanche bullet, of course. Tovitsi took a step forward.
Ah!
Wade yelled, jamming the pistol hard against Naya's temple. Naya whimpered. Tovitsi froze. "You stay," Wade commanded. "I am going to get the marshal. He will want to see this. My men will stay here. They will keep you comfortable. If you even breathe well, you know." Wade backed out of the tent, dragging the terrified girl with him, his pistol never wavering. "To the market! We will make this public!" he shouted to his men. The two men in the tent grinned, leveling their rifles. "Do not move, Chief," one said. Maggie was shaking. She was watching Wade go. She saw him cross the open market square. She saw the railroad workers stopping to look. "Tovitsi," she whispered. Her eyes were not on the gunmen. They were in the dead fire pit, on the pot, the big iron stew pot. It was still there. And next to it, her gaze locked on the small wooden box, the one she had kept her spices in, the one marked Cayenne. "He will kill her," Tovitsi whispered, his voice ravaged. He was looking at his daughter, a hostage in the center of the square. "No, he will not," Maggie said. She lowered her hands. "Hey," the gunman shouted, raising his rifle. "Hands up!" "I am just getting a drink," Maggie said, her voice shaking. "Please, my mouth is dry." She stumbled, not toward the gunman, but toward the water barrel, which was right next to the dead fire. "Stay still." Maggie fell. She did not fall gracefully. She crashed, as if her legs had given out, her body slamming into the spice box. It exploded, sending a cloud of dark red powder into the air. And into the pot. The pot was not empty. It was filled with old, rancid rainwater, thick with grease. "You clumsy," the gunman started to say. Maggie did not get up. She rolled, grabbing the handle of the heavy iron pot, with a roar that came from the same place as the one at the ford. She flung the pot, not at the men, but at the ground in front of them. The pot hit the packed earth and burst. A gallon of foul, stinking water and thick, red cayenne mud exploded outward. The men screamed. They were not hit, but the red, stinging slurry coated their faces, their eyes, their mouths. They dropped their rifles, clawing at their faces. "My eyes, God, my eyes." "Now!" Maggie shrieked. Tovitsi did not need to be told. He was a blur. He did not go for his rifle. He launched himself at the first man, his shoulder hitting him in the chest, sending him crashing out of the tent. He grabbed the second man, the one still screaming, and threw him face first into the pile of moldy mutton. Outside, in the square, Wade heard the screams. He turned, confused. "What in—" It was all the time Naya needed. She was her uncle's niece. She bit down, hard, on the hand that held her hair. Wade roared in pain. His grip loosening, Naya dropped, twisting away. Tovitsi was out of the tent. He was running, not at Wade, but at his own rifle, lying in the dust. Wade saw him. He raised his pistol, ignoring Naya, ignoring his screaming men. This was it. A shot rang out. It was not Wade's pistol. It was a rifle. Wade looked down, confused. His right hand, his gun hand, was a ruin of blood. The pistol fell to the dirt. Tave was on the roof of the saloon, Tovitsi's rifle in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. Wade clutched his bleeding hand, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. He looked at Tovitsi, at Maggie, who was running from the tent, her face streaked with red powder. The whole town was surrounding them. The railroad workers, their faces hard. Wade did the only thing he could. He ran. He fled, clutching his hand, toward the one place he knew he was safe. He kicked open the door of Deacon Crowell's office and vanished inside. A low murmur came from the crowd. He ran to Deacon. He was working for Deacon all along. Deacon Crowell himself burst from the office. "What is the meaning of this, I will have you all?" "You will have nothing," Maggie said, her voice carrying over the crowd. She was not shouting. She was cold, clear, and done. She walked to the cook tent. She came back, dragging the ledger. She kicked the rotting barrel of mutton out into the sunlight. The crowd recoiled from the smell. "This," she said, pointing to the barrel, "is what Deacon Crowell fed your man Finn. This is the poison I was accused of." She held up the ledger. "And this is the book where he sold that poison to his own camp, signed with his own name." Deacon's face was white. "This is slander. It is a forgery." "Is it?" Maggie said. Naya ran forward and placed the brass seal in her hand. "Just like this seal, the one you pressed into my confession, the one you dropped behind the shed." Deacon looked at the seal. His composure broke. "It is not true. The handwriting, Deacon," a new voice said. Reverend Gideon walked through the crowd. He was no longer afraid. His face was set with a cold, righteous anger. "I have seen Maggie Odell's signature. I was a witness at her wedding. And the signature on that confession," he said, his voice booming, "is a forgery. It is not her hand." The crowd turned. They were not a mob. They were a jury. They looked at the moldy meat. They looked at the ledger. They looked at the terrified face of Deacon Crowell. And they looked at the railroad workers who'd been sick, who had been shorted on pay, who had been fed lies. Finn, the man who had been poisoned, stepped forward. He pushed Deacon Crowell. "You did this." Deacon stumbled. "Get back. I am in charge." "You are nothing," another worker said. And he tore the chief of security badge from Deacon's vest. The crowd surged, not with violence, but with a cold purpose. They seized Deacon. Inside the office, the door opened. Tavitsi walked out. He was dragging Wade Thorne, who was now bound with his own gun belt. His ruined hand was wrapped in a dirty cloth. Tavitsi did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Deacon. He walked to the center of the square and dropped Wade at the feet of the marshal, who had just arrived, drawn by the gunshot. "This is the man who shot Tave." Tavitsi said, "This is the man who kidnapped my niece. He is yours." He turned and walked away from the marshal, away from the yelling, away from Deacon, who was now being half carried, half dragged, by his own men. He walked to Maggie. She was standing alone, shaking, the adrenaline draining, leaving her weak and cold. The cayenne powder was on her skin, making it sting. He reached her. He did not speak. He did not touch her face or kiss her. He simply stood in front of her, blocking her from the crowd. He took off his own vest, the one he had worn back from the camp, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was a public act. It was warm. It was a promise. He stood there with her, his arm around her, shielding her, as the town finally, loudly, cleaned its own house. The square did not erupt in violence. It simply deflated, the anger that had held Crossspur in its grip for weeks. Fueled by Deacon's lies and Wade's aggression, collapsed into a sour, weary silence. The railroad workers, men who had been ready to hang Maggie, now just stared at the rotting meat and the damning ledger. The marshal, a tall man with a face that had seen too much, took charge with quiet efficiency. He listened. He took the ledger from Maggie's hand, handling it as if it were a live explosive. He looked at the brass seal. Reverend Gideon, his voice shaking but righteous, gave his statement first, formally attesting to the forged confession. The marshal nodded, writing in a small notebook. Wade Thorne, his hand wrapped in a bloody rag, was bound and hauled to the jail wagon. He was silent. his eyes burning with a hateful, defeated fire. He looked at Maggie, and then at Tavitsi, but said nothing. The fight was gone. Deacon Crowell was another matter. He tried to bluster, tried to name-drop railroad commissioners, but the crowd simply parted for the marshal. "Sir," Deacon sputtered, "this is an internal company matter. This woman is a disgruntled employee. She is a victim, Mr. Crowell," the marshal said, his voice flat. He pointed to the rotten barrel. "And this is evidence of fraud. At the least, negligence causing grievous harm. At the worst." He gestured to two newly arrived deputies. "Take him. He will face the circuit judge with his friend." Deacon, the man who saw the world as his personal ledger, looked broken. He was no longer a pillar of the community. He was just a cheat. He was taken away. The crowd began to disperse, not knowing what to do next. The show was over. They just looked tired. Finn, the young man Maggie had saved, approached her. His face was pale. He twisted his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Odell," he said, his voice low. "I am the one who believed them." "You were sick, Finn," Maggie said, her voice rough. She was still shaking. "Aye, but I believed it," he said. "And we said things, called you." "I know," Maggie said. "It is done." "No, ma'am," another man said, stepping up. He was one of the men who had held her down in the tent. "It is not. We owe you. You saved Finn, and you saved us from him." He gestured toward the jail wagon. A railroad official, a man in a clean suit who had arrived on the same train as the marshal, stepped forward. He had been conferring with the Reverend Mrs. Odell, he said, clearing his throat. "It appears this company owes you a significant apology, and, according to these ledgers, Mr. Silas owed you back pay. The company will assume that debt, 3 weeks' pay, at $3 a week." "No," Maggie said. The man stopped. "No. My kitchen was destroyed. My supplies were stolen. My name was ruined. And your men were poisoned by your foreman." She looked at the crowd of weary, hungry men. "You do not owe me $9. You owe this entire camp a safe place to eat." The official was taken aback. "I do not understand." "I want the cook tent," Maggie said, pointing to the ruined canvas. "I want the contract. Silas is gone. I will take it, and I will run it." "Run it," the man said, confused. "Alone." "She will not be alone," Tavitsi said, stepping forward. He had been silent until now. He stood beside her, his presence a solid, undeniable fact. He looked at the railroad official. "Your camp needs food. My people need trade. You have flour, you have sugar, you have metal. We have fresh meat. We have hides. We have herbs. This kitchen," he gestured to the tent, "will be the new trading post. You will give her the contract, and you will sign a trade agreement with me, a fair one. My people will provision this kitchen, and your men will finally eat clean food." The official looked from Tavitsi to Maggie. At the hard, united front they presented, he looked at the crowd of railroad workers, who were nodding in agreement. This was not a negotiation. It was a solution. "We need rules," Maggie said, cutting in before he could argue. "My rules. I will run a clean kitchen, clean water, clean knives, clean fire. No more rancid meat, no more sickness. That is the only way." The official, seeing his entire workforce about to mutiny, nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. A clean kitchen. We will draw up the contract." It was done. The next few days were a blur of activity. The railroad company, desperate to avoid a larger scandal, threw its resources behind Maggie. They cleared the old, filthy tent. They brought in new lumber, new barrels, and a new canvas. Maggie worked from sunup to sundown. She was not a victim, she was a whirlwind. She directed the men, showing them how to build the new pantry, how to scrub the iron with lye, and how to secure the water barrels. Finn, now her devoted assistant, worked beside her. The men who had once mocked her now followed her orders with a quiet respect. On the third day, Atsa arrived. She did not come with the trade wagons. She came alone, walking into the new, clean cook tent. Maggie was scrubbing a cutting board, the rhythm of the work a comfort. Atsa watched her for a moment. Then she held something out. "This is for you," Atsa said in her low, careful English. "From the elders, from me." It was a spoon. It was not like the rough, hurried one Tovitsi had carved on the trail. This one was a work of art. It was carved from a dark, smooth wood, polished until it shone. The handle was etched with a delicate pattern of winding rivers and cornstalks. "It is beautiful," Maggie whispered, drying her hands on her apron before she dared to touch it. "It is a woman's spoon," Atsa said, "a stirring spoon, for the great pot, for the home." She closed Maggie's hand around it. "You are warm soup. You saved our camp. Now you save this one. You must have the right tool." Atsa smiled, her face a web of kind wrinkles. "The grandmothers say you must use this to scoop the warmth, for both worlds." Maggie held the spoon, its weight perfect in her hand. It was not a weapon. It was not a tool of survival. It was a badge of honor. They rented a small room behind the Reverend's chapel, away from the noise of the saloon. It was small, just a bed, a chair, and a small, rickety porch. But it was quiet, and it was safe. Tave had returned to the winter camp with the good news, but Tovitsi had stayed. The trade agreement had to be signed. He, too, was working, meeting with the railroad men, setting the prices for hides and dried meat. Naya was their shadow, but she was no longer the tense, silent scout. She was a child. She played in the dust in front of the chapel, talking to the Reverend's dog, hoarding small, bright stones. That night, Maggie and Tovitsi walked her back to the room. Maggie had made stew in her new kitchen, a thick, clean stew of bison meat and onions. They ate on the porch, watching the sky turn a deep, bruised purple. Naya fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. She was clutching the fishbone necklace in her small fist. As Maggie watched, the child sighed in her sleep and whispered one soft word. "Home." Maggie felt her throat tighten. She gently lifted the girl and carried her inside, tucking her into the small bed. She was safe. They were all safe. Maggie came back out onto the porch. Tovitsi was standing by the rail, looking out at the darkness. The air was cold, the first true promise of winter. She went to her kitchen stores, stacked against the wall. She took a thick wool blanket, one she had traded for that afternoon. She came and stood beside him. She did not speak, just unfolded the blanket and held part of it out to him. He looked at her, then at the blanket. He took his side, and she wrapped her own around her shoulders. They stood side by side, not touching, just sharing the warmth, listening to the night. The sounds of Crossspur were different. There was no shouting, no angry drunkenness, just the distant sound of a hammer and a harmonica playing a low, sad tune. The sound of men working, not fighting. "You built a good kitchen," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We built it," she corrected. "It will not work without your trade." "And the trade will not work without your kitchen." They were quiet again. Maggie leaned her head back, looking at the stars. She was exhausted, down to her bones. But it was a good exhaustion. "Tomorrow," she said, "I am painting a sign for the front." "A sign?" "Just a small one, on a piece of wood. I will hang it over the door." "What will it say?" he asked. "Maggie's kitchen." She smiled, a small, tired smile. "No, it will say, warmth not for sale." He turned his head, looking at her in the dim light. He understood. He remembered her words at the camp, when she had asked if he was buying her for his bed. He thought of Deacon, who had tried to buy her silence, her life, with a false debt. "It is a good sign," he said. He shifted, turning to face her. She turned to face him. The blanket pooled around them. A shared space. "Maggie Odell," he said, and his voice was formal, just as it had been at the dance. "Tovitsi," she replied. "The rules," he said. "We spoke of rules. On the trail." "Yes," she whispered. "Rule 3. "I am not a man of many words," he said, and she could see the struggle in his face, the vulnerability. "My nights are still long, but I do not wish for them to be lonely. Not anymore." He looked at her, his eyes clear and honest. "I am asking—" Maggie's heart, which she thought had been hammered into stillness by fear and grief, suddenly felt too large for her chest. She had been bought, sold, accused, and abandoned. But she had never, not once, been asked. She did not speak. She just raised her hand and placed it on his chest, over his heart. She could feel its steady, strong beat under her palm. It was an answer. He reached up, his hand covering hers. He did not pull her to him. He did not seize her. He simply held her hand there, sharing his warmth, his life. He leaned in, and this time, it was not a chaste brush of lips in a firelit circle. This time, it was a promise. His mouth found hers in the darkness, and it was a kiss of profound, patient hunger. It was not the rough demand of a man like Wade, or the clumsy need of a man like Seamus. It was a question, an offering, and a welcome. It was consent. It was warm. It was peaceful. She kissed him back, letting go of the cold, hard anger she had carried for 2 years, letting go of the fear. She was not a victim. She was not a widow. She was warm as Fiji arm soup. He put his arms around her, pulling her close, the blanket enveloping them both. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in, the scent of smoke and herbs and soap. "It is a long time," he murmured against her skin, "to be at war." "The war is over," she whispered, her arms sliding around his strong, safe back. "It is over." He lifted her then, as easily as he had lifted her onto the pony that first night, and carried her from the cold porch into the warm darkness of the room, closing the door on the lonely night. And on the past, the winter came, hard and fast, just as the dry autumn had promised. But Cross Spur did not starve. The new cook tent, rebuilt with solid pine timbers and thick canvas, became the heart of the town. Maggie, true to her word, had painted a sign. It was simple, carved into a piece of scrap wood she had salvaged. It hung over the door, the letters clear and steady. Warm Soup Crossing. It was not a saloon, and it was not a company mess hall. It was something new, a place that belonged to the space between. It was a place where a railroad worker, his face gray with grime, could sit at a rough-hewn table next to Tave, who had come in with a delivery of cured bison hides. The rules were Maggie's rules. The first was clean hands. She had Finn, who was now her full-time assistant and fierce protector, build a washing trough near the entrance. A block of lye soap and a bucket of clean water were always there. No one ate until they washed. The men grumbled for the first 2 days. On the 3rd day, Finn stood at the door, pointed to the trough, and simply said, "She means it." The men washed. The constant sickness, the stomach cramps that had plagued the camp for months, vanished. The menu was simple. It was the food of 2 worlds. The staple, the item that cost 1 cent, was the bone broth. It was the rich marrow soup she had made at Confluence Ford, hot, life-giving, and clean. Alongside it were her corn cakes, made now with the Comanche ash method that Atsa had taught her, and a thick, savory bison stew, flavored with herbs from the winter camp. The trade agreement Tovitsi had forged was the spine of the operation. He and the new railroad official, a nervous man from Omaha, signed it on the new, clean counter of the kitchen. It was a document unlike any the territory had seen. It set fair prices: 10 steel knives for 20 processed hides, 2 sacks of flour and 1 of sugar for a full load of dried meat and salt. Tavitsi, using his new authority as a recognized trading partner, had added a clause. Maggie had insisted on it. 10% of all profits from the kitchen and 10% of all trade goods would be placed in a community trust. They called it the Winter Fund. It was not for the company or for the tribe. It was for the children. Not just Naya and the children in the winter camp, but the children of the railroad workers, the families huddled in the sod shacks by the tracks. It was for blankets, for medicine, and for shoes. It was a shared investment in survival. The kitchen became a classroom. The railroad company, seeing a 50% decline in sick days among the crew, asked Maggie to teach her methods. Once a week, she held a hygiene class. She gathered the other camp cooks, the wives of the railroaders, and any of the men who were curious. "You do not clean a pot with dirty water," she explained, holding up her scarred, capable hands. "You do not cut raw meat on the same board you cut your bread. Sickness is not bad luck. Sickness is filth, and filth," she said, looking at the men, "is a choice. We choose to be clean here." The men, who had once called her a witch, now took notes. Naya thrived. She was the bridge. In the mornings, she helped Maggie in the kitchen, her English becoming fast and clear as she translated for Tave and the other traders. In the afternoons, Reverend Gideon, his courage returned and his conscience scrubbed clean, taught her to read. He used the Bible, but Maggie also gave him her own copy of the Common Sense Cookery book. Naya would sit on the chapel steps, her small, dark finger tracing the letters. C-O-R-N, corn. Tavitsi, in turn, began to teach. The town children, who had once hidden from him, were now fascinated. He was the man who had faced down Wade Thorne without firing a shot. They followed him. He would sit with them by the frozen creek bed, Naya beside him, translating. He did not teach them war. He taught them the land. He showed them how to read the patterns of the frost, how to find the North Star. "That one," he said, pointing to the unchanging star, "is the road that does not move. If you know where you are never lost." The railroad depot was finished, the day it officially opened, the day the first scheduled freight train was due. Maggie and Tavitsi chose to bind their lives. They had 2 ceremonies. The first was in the chapel. Reverend Gideon, his voice thick with emotion, stood before them. The chapel was full. The railroad workers, clean and in their Sunday clothes, stood shoulder to shoulder with Atsa, Tave, and a small, proud delegation from the winter camp. Naya, wearing a new dress made of blue calico, held a bunch of dried prairie flowers. Maggie wore a simple gray wool dress, the fishbone necklace a stark, beautiful white at her throat. Tavitsi wore his dark blue tunic. He stood, not as a chief, not as a warrior, but as a man. The Reverend read the familiar words, of sickness and health, of richer and poorer. But when it came time for the vows, they spoke their own. Tavitsi looked at Maggie, his hands holding hers. "I was a man of long nights," he said, his voice clear and steady. "You brought the fire. I choose to stay, this day and all the days that follow." Maggie looked at him, her hands steady in his. "I was a woman who was not needed," she said. "You saw my hands. You saw me. I choose to stay, this day and all the days." The second ceremony was outside, under the vast, cold, open sky. Atsa led them. She did not use a ring. She lit a small, clean fire of sage and sweetgrass. She had them hold their hands, his and hers, in the fragrant smoke. It was a cleansing, a promise, a purification. "The smoke joins you," Atsa said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Your breath is now one breath. Your fire is now one fire. You have chosen. It is done." The train came. The depot opened. The railroad had won its path to the west, but Deacon Crowell was not there to see it. He and Wade Thorne, according to the marshal, had been bound for a federal court in Cheyenne to face charges of fraud and attempted murder. The freight depot opened, but the winter camp was not moved. The buffer zone did not need to be cleared. It had become a bridge. Cross Spur was no longer a point of conflict. It was a point of exchange, a place where two worlds met and traded, not in bullets, but in bread. The sun was setting. It was a cold evening, the light a thin, gold line on the horizon. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, purple and deep blue. Inside, warm soup crossing. The lamps were lit. The room was full of men, their voices a low, comfortable rumble. Maggie, wearing her canvas apron, was behind the counter. She held the new spoon, the one Atsa had given her. She ladled hot, rich bone soup into a bowl and slid it across the counter to a young deputy, one of the men who had come with the marshal. He nodded his thanks, his face thawing in the steam. "Thank you, ma'am." Outside, on the small porch of their room behind the chapel, Tovitsi was working. The old rail was loose. He was securing it with a new length of rawhide. His hands, the same hands that had taught Naya to braid, moving with a sure, steady rhythm. Naya was not on the porch. She was in the street, running. She was not scouting. She was playing. She chased the Reverend's dog in a wide, happy circle. Her laughter a bright, sharp sound in the cold air. The fishbone necklace, which she had borrowed back, bounced against her calico dress. In the distance, from the new depot, a train whistle blew. It was a long, metallic cry, a sound that sliced through the twilight. Maggie, at her counter, heard it. She stopped, her hand on the ladle. It was the sound that had haunted her sleep for 2 years, the high, keening whine of metal under pressure, the scream of the boiler. She looked up. Through the window, she saw Tovitsi. He had looked up, too, at the sound. He looked at her. He did not smile. He simply met her gaze, a solid, present fact. She looked at Naya, who was laughing, ignoring the sound completely. She looked at the deputy, drinking his soup. Maggie turned back to her pots. The sound was still there, but it was just a sound. It was a train, carrying goods, going west. It was not the end of the world. It was just a noise. The fear was gone. She picked up her polished wooden spoon and went back to work. Later that night, when the kitchen was clean, she hung the spoon on its hook. The hook was on the wall of their small room, a place of honor. She hung it, and right beside it, she hung the delicate white fishbone necklace. The dark, polished wood and the fragile, pearly bones rested together. 2 cultures, 2 promises, 1 home, 1 fire. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help us share these stories with more listeners just like you.